Greetings, buenas noches, good evening. My name is Omar Adawahare, and I'm the Assistant Director at the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies. On behalf of our Director, Jill Lane, our faculty and students, we want to welcome you and our distinguished guests to tonight's initial presentation of the Spring 2021 Colombia Past, Present, and Futures Working Group Series. We will have two more talks coming up, one on March 16th and the other one on April 20th. All are going to be starting at the same time, so please make sure to mark your calendars. Those will be hosted by CLACS in collaboration with our partners at the Wagner School of Public Service and Universidad del Rosario. This partnership, called the Colombian Studies Initiative, Past, Present, and Futures, aims to create an inter-American hub for research, multidisciplinary conversations, and exchange of knowledge concerning Colombia. It does so by supporting dialogue, inquiry, and research for US, Colombian, and international scholars, students, NGO practitioners, and the general public interested in Colombia. We are very excited about tonight's presentation by Dr. Thomas Hill, Katerina Siira, and Marta Bautista Forcada on collaboration and partnership in peace building, spotlighting the relation between the Peace Research and Education Program at NYU and resupas. Now, I pass the virtual podium to Amparo Hoffman-Pinilla, who will formally introduce our panelists for tonight and share a little bit more about the program. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mar. Good evening, buenas noches a todos. My name is Amparo Hoffman-Pinilla, Senior Executive Manager at the Colombian Studies Past, Present, and Futures. Thank you for joining us today. We have a wonderful audience today from Colombia, the United States, and other countries. And I want to say to all of you, welcome to the first talk of the 2021 Faculty Working Group Series hosted by Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies in collaboration with NYU Wagner and Universidad de Rosario in Bogotá, Colombia. The Faculty Working Group is a core activity of the Colombian initiative. It started last year with 5 successful conversations, talks that happened over the spring and the fall, and the goal of these working groups is to future relevant work of scholars, shedding light on historical and contemporary issues shaping Colombian political and social landscape. It also offers a space of dialogue with international audience about critical issues affecting peace building and democracy in Colombia. I'm very excited about tonight's presentation on the Joint Research Seminar in Peace Building, a collaborative project between Colombian researchers and students from resupas and the Escuela Superior de Administración Pública, with faculty and master students from NYU's Center for Global Affairs. Our guests, Dr. Thomas Hill, Katerina Siira, and Marta Bautista, we talk about the gains and challenges of building an equitable partnership as they use participatory action research to understand the challenges related to the implementation of the peace and reparation process from the experience and perception of local key stakeholders. This important work was advanced in Algeciras, one of the municipalities most affected by the armed conflict and violence in Colombia. Dr. Thomas Hill is a clinical associate professor at the Center for Global Affairs at the NYU School of Professional Studies, where he serves as the director of the Peace Research and Educational Program. He's a peace building practitioner and researcher who has led peace educational projects in Iraq over the past 20 years. Most recently, he directed a project with support from the International Research and Exchange Board. Dr. Hill also leads projects in Libya, Colombia, and Kuwait, among other countries. Katerina Siira directs the Peace Research and Educational Program work in Colombia, where she supports education and action research on topics such as transitional justice and peace building in partnership with the Colombian Truth Commission, Fund Resupas, and the Rosario University. Katerina also designs and facilitates other programs with universities and youth in Iraq, Kuwait, and Libya. She's an adjunct instructor at NYU Center of Global Affairs, where she teaches the Joint Research Seminar in Peacebuilding. Marta Bautista Forcada is a program associate at the Center on International Cooperation, working with Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies team. She has worked with numerous international peacebuilding and human rights organizations, including Amnesty International, the Women International League for Peace and Freedom, and the International Peace Institute. At NYU Prep, she conducted field research in rural Colombia, focusing on ex-combat's perception of the 2016 peace agreement, the implementation process, and the reparation system. I want to thank our wonderful speaker for accepting this invitation. And before I pass the microphone to Tom, I want to let our audience know that at the end, we will leave 20 minutes for questions and answers. And you should feel free to submit your questions through the chat. We will let you know when we are going to open the chat. In fact, you can submit the questions either in Spanish or English. So Tom, welcome. The microphone is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amparo. Thank you, everyone, for welcoming us, for inviting us and welcoming us to this very nice forum, to CLACS, to the Colombian Studies Initiative. I know that I speak for my colleagues as well as for myself when I say that we really, really appreciate the opportunity to speak about the very special work we feel we've been doing in Colombia for most of the past 4 years. You've already heard that the work has mostly occurred, what you're going to be hearing about this evening, in the municipality of Algeciras, in the Huila department. And so rather than speak much about the details, which I'm going to leave a little bit to my colleagues, I want to take a chance to give you a little bit of a sense of the background of the work and the motivations that really have driven it during the time we've been working in Colombia. And I'd like to do that by offering 4 themes that I think are foundational to the work, and that I hope will begin to paint a picture of our collaboration in Colombia. You've already heard that the Joint Research Seminar in Peacebuilding is at once it's a course at the Center for Global Affairs in our master's program, but it's also an initiative of the Peace Research and Education program that I direct. And so it's a very interdisciplinary undertaking. It's a very collaborative undertaking. And I think you'll understand how and why after you've heard from all 3 of us. So what I'd like to do is to really highlight these themes that I think are so important to the work, and say a little bit about each of them. 4 things that I find to be really important about it. The first one is what I would call the importance of serendipity. PrEP did not set out to work in Colombia. We didn't sort of seek out a partner or plan to do something in the aftermath of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. Rather, it started like this. As you may see on your screen right now, a Colombian partner reached out to us on my LinkedIn site very, very informally on the 26th of October, 2016. And that's actually how our collaboration began. She reached out. I somewhat famously within our program didn't respond to her for more than a month because I tend to be a bit slow on some of my social media doings. And but this is really what happened. We had outreach from a partner at ISAP, at the Escuela Superior de Administración Pública, and the conversation just began about, as she said, the possibility of working together. from that led us into a longer conversation about what that work might look like, how we might have something of value to add. And of course, led us ultimately to the joint research seminar in Peacebuilding that you'll hear more about this evening. The second theme that I want to highlight is really the importance of what I consider principled work. When I finally did have a conversation with this partner who reached out to me, I learned that she was drawn to our work because it focused on the relational dimensions of peace building and was explicitly distinguished from what was known as the traditional conflict resolution. Taking this relational approach, which is really rooted in the work of John Paul Lederach and others, it really meant that we would only enter the context, only begin this work, if promise existed to build a meaningful partnership. We would not have begun this work if we thought this was a program that would run for 3 months or 6 months or even 1 year, and then it would be finished. As we've said to other partners, not only in Colombia, if we're going to begin to work with you, we're going to envision how we're going to still be working with you in 20 years, if you want to be working with us for that long. So what this really meant is that we had to do a lot of listening first and not impose our ideas on our partners. Okay, the third theme that I want to highlight is the importance of patience. And this is the one that I think very often international scholars have a very hard time with, because we all have our own schedules, we have our own demands, we have our own professional expectations, and certainly our students have their own time in a program, which is time limited. And I would say that there have been many moments in the past 4 years when the process we anticipated with resupas or with ISAP did not happen or was extremely delayed. As you will hear more from Marta, the very start of the Joint Research Seminar in Peacebuilding was fraught with changes that easily could have served as justification for canceling it altogether. There were many delays in terms of identifying many different parts of the project. But I'd say instead, at every step, we made a conscious decision to be patient, to stick with the process, and to believe in our partners. The result, I believe, was the development of a very high degree of trust between us that I think really ran both ways. The fourth theme, I think, it was really the importance of remaining open to possibilities. Coming from NYU, coming from New York, coming from the United States, we have great privilege. We know this, we recognize it very well. And part of the privilege that we have is really to say no to anything at any time, to not accept invitations that seem, a bit, intangible in some ways. And we can do that. We can say no because, coming again from a big university like NYU, coming from New York, coming from the US, we know that there will always be other opportunities, other chances for research for our students around the corner. But what we've been very careful to do is really honor the invitations that we do receive and recognize the importance of them, and the sort of the reality of those invitations rather than invitations that might come in the future. So a key to our work in Colombia has been consistently saying yes to our partners and respecting the vulnerability that they display simply by asking for our partnership. We might have said no 2.5 years ago when the Joint Research Seminar in Peacebuilding got off to a rough start. We might have said no when we got to Algeciras and found that our student research partners, frankly, they didn't possess the same level of technical writing or research skills that our students at NYU did, for some very good reasons. First of all, many of them were undergraduates, they were younger, they were less experienced, and and they've lived in some very difficult circumstances that our students have not encountered. We also might have said no when it became clear later in the research process that the burden of the writing and the editing and the creation of our edited volume that we ultimately produced was really going to fall on our shoulders, on our students, on our team of editors. And we certainly also might have said, no a few months ago when ISAP reached back out to us and asked us to collaborate on a new research project that's going, you'll hear a little bit about later, that's going to take place in 5 different departments in Colombia. And of course, we absolutely could have said no when another project that we're now engaged in with resupas began, that's looking at the effectiveness of municipal level peace building, when that kicked off this past fall. And rather than doing what we had anticipated, which was traveling to Colombia, working directly with our partners over the period of a year, we had to transfer it, like almost everyone has, to a remote modality, which of course has been very difficult given connectivity problems and and general sort of timing and other issues that make international work difficult. But instead, we didn't say no to any of those. We emphatically said yes at each of those moments, trusting in the quality of the relationship with our partners, believing that only by consistently signaling our willingness to take risks would we be fulfilling our promise to make the work fully participatory. So where did this come from? Where did this idea emerge? Before we began working with Colombian partners, I had worked for more than 15 years with university and civil society partners in Iraq. That's really where I became involved in this field first. The context, of course, is extremely different, but there are some observations of Iraq that are applicable to Colombia. Certainly the 4 themes that I've mentioned earlier, the importance of serendipity, the importance of principled work, the importance of patience, and the importance of remaining open to possibilities, all grew out of observations that I made in Iraq. In fact, this work in many ways emerged as a response to actors I've encountered who did not seize upon serendipity, did not remain principled, did not practice patience, and made a habit of saying no to almost everything. What I saw left in their wake was a set of non-relationships, an utter lack of trust and respect, and almost nothing lasting that was accomplished, unless the consumption of large sums of money counts as an accomplishment. PrEP's work in Iraq, and subsequently in Colombia, has measured its value in very different ways that I think are having very different and more satisfying outcomes. I'm going to leave it to my colleagues, Katerina and Marta, to describe some of the details of this work for you. And I'd be happy to speak about more of the details at the end of the session when we have an opportunity for some questions and answers. So Marta, would you like to take it from there?
So I want to start by thanking all the organizers of this very important event. And I also want to thank Katerina and Tom for inviting me to be part of this panel to talk about my experience of the Joint Research Seminar in Peacebuilding in Colombia as a student. So with the time that I have and, skipping a lot of details, I'm going to mention some highlights of my experience and some of the reflections that I made, before going to Colombia while we were preparing for the research, then during the field research, and finally a couple of reflections after going to Colombia. And I hope that they will be interesting for all of you. So very quickly, just a little bit for context, the Joint Research Seminar in Peacebuilding, as Tom mentioned, was made of 2 courses. One was happening in the summer. For me, it was summer of 2018. And then the first part of the course, in the summer was we were going to receive or welcome the Colombian students and develop the research proposal, to then in January 2019 in the winter, go to Colombia and conduct this field research. As you can see in the photo in the screen, it was 4 of us, 4 NYU students. But the thing is that, when this seminar started in the summer, there was something that we were not expecting, which is that for reasons that were not in our hands, really, the students in Colombia, unfortunately, they could never make it to New York to do the first part of the joint research seminar. So obviously for, days during the summer course and then months after it, we didn't really know how we would do this joint research, or, even if we were going to be able to do it at all. So as you can imagine, it was a little bit of a desperate situation at more than one point. But, eventually we had conversations with different faculty at ESAP. And specifically once we talked to ESAP professor Nelson Rincon. We presented our ideas, our research, and asked him for advice. And he said, well, it would be amazing actually if you could come to Algeciras, conduct a joint research with my team of ESAP students who are also researchers at resupas. So very quickly, Amparo already mentioned that Algeciras is one of the municipalities most affected by the violence during the more than 50 years of our internal conflict. And the FARC actually took over almost at the very beginning of the conflict. And so the town suffered a lot from the violence. And Nelson's team had been working on a participatory action research project documenting the violence suffered by Algeciras, and we're working to have the municipality recognized as a collective victim of the conflict to get collective reparations as established in the 2016 peace agreement. So, after hearing this from Nelson, so hearing this invitation, the 4 of us, all the NYU team, Tom and Katerina, we were finally hopeful, and something was going to happen. In terms of the research, just again a little bit for context. So of the 4 NYU students, we were paired with between 3 and 5 resupas researchers. We decided that we wanted to study the perceptions or the perspectives of the community in Algeciras, about the effectiveness of the implementation of the reparation system that was established in the 2016 peace agreement, in terms of how it was contributing to increased peacefulness in the community in Algeciras. And each of the 4 teams would focus on a different group in the community. A group focused on women survivors of the FARC's violence, another one on women survivors of the state violence, another one on youth, and finally the one that I focused on was on FARC ex-combatants. So moving forward, it's January 2019, and the NYU team finally lands in Colombia to do the research for 2.5 weeks. So, it felt like it was finally happening after all these obstacles encountered. We didn't really know what to expect, but the whole experience was really special. Every day, both the resupas team and the NYU team, that we would meet and we would debrief, but we never started one of these meetings. We always started these meetings with, singing some songs while Professor Rincon would play the guitar. And I thought that was a very beautiful way to, create a bond and with both teams and start this conversation and start the work that we were doing together. One of the things that really stand out for me, and that was very important to hear, was from the resupas group in these debriefs, was to hear that they were excited that we were there, the work that we were doing was going to support the work that they've been doing for years now, to try to put Algeciras in the map. And this really inspired me and really made me more eager to continue with this work. So as I mentioned before, with my team of co-researchers, we focused on FARC ex-combatants as a group in the Algeciras community. And I want to share just 3 highlights that for me were important from this experience and things that I learned from it. The first one is that, knowing that the participants, actually the ex-combatants that we interviewed, that they wanted us there, they wanted to talk to us. And this was something that was a little bit scary for me, made me nervous to think that they would just think of us as foreigners, of outsiders, and they wouldn't want us there. but it made me happy and reassured that they actually wanted, they actually liked the idea of having an outsider listening to them. Another thing is that through these interviews, I learned firsthand the complexities of the country. It was really eye-opening to put names, faces, and hear each of their stories that are unique. Talking to each of them and understanding that I don't want to justify anything that they did, but just seeing how differently they experienced this conflict, and the different reasons they had to join the FARC. Some of them told me they didn't see another way out, that was the only way. Some really believed in the ideals, but with that I want to say that to me it was really eye-opening to see all the sides of the same story, and as a student it was truly a lesson for me. And finally, just a final point, that my third highlight would be that, I'm very thankful of the partnership that we had with the resupas students, because thanks to all the work that they had been doing for the past, I think it was 3 years, and all the relationships that they created and curated for all this time, it was possible for us to interview so many people in the community. There was no way that, I could have interviewed 12 ex-combatants by myself and organized all this research in less than 20 days. So I'm very thankful for that relationship and for that partnership, for sure. And finally, I want to make just two final reflections of the experience as a whole. While it was kind of an uncomfortable experience at the beginning for the reasons that I mentioned and other reasons that Tom also quickly touched upon, I can say today that this was really one of the most significant and life-changing experiences that I've had. I think it's a really unique experience as a student. And it's also a real experience, a real life experience with all the challenges and also the successes, but mostly the challenges and the not knowing what's going to happen, but still, as Tom mentioned, be patient and, keep going and see where this, leads you. And I want to end by saying that, there is absolutely no doubt that, a strong bond was created between us NYU students and the resupas researchers. We shared a lot of food and music, excellent food, by the way, music, laughs, and motorbike rides, and hikes and walks. And I wish I could also say all their names, because it feels a little bit impersonal to just say this group of people. But we definitely can say that we have friends in Algeciras, and they have friends in New York. And actually, this bond, I think a true testament of this relationship or this friendship is as NYU students, my 3 colleagues and I, we created this participatory fundraising campaign to help our friends in Algeciras to complete the project that they had been working on in the past 3 years. That it was so important to us. The ultimate goal is to build sustainable peace in Algeciras, and it was amazing that we were able to support in that way. And I think that Katerina will expand more on this project and what happened after this crowdfunding campaign. So I think I'm gonna end here. Thanks so much to everyone for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards.
Thank you so much, Marta. It really definitely makes me feel very heartwarmed. I'm sure Tom too, to hear that this experience was meaningful for you. So I really appreciate that. And so I just wanted to continue following the arc that Tom began, talking about how the process began, and then Marta touched on what it was like to be there, to kind of where we are today. And also to think about the ways in which it has been impactful and meaningful, not just for our NYU students, but for resupas as well. So, right now, resupas, thanks to the, the contributions that Marta and her cohort were able to raise, has been able to incorporate into an actual foundation, which has enabled them to continue to do more and more peace building work in their community. And that for us is such an incredible success of this project. project. And so because of that, we're able to continue working with them. We're currently working with them on a grant-funded project titled Municipal Leaders Building Peace, Understanding Locally Led Impact in Conflict-Affected Countries. And so this first year, we're working with resupas. And as Tom mentioned, we're also working with them as an ESAP research group on this, systematizing the work of human rights defenders and how that's contributed to public policy. And so, I just described 2 projects that we're working on with them, but I can't iterate enough that, our relationship with them has not and has never been contingent upon a finance project or, a discrete research question. And I think this is really the fundamental part of our work, and perhaps, one of the ways in which our approach is different from others. It really is based in an intentional commitment to long-term engagement. And I think the proof of Tom working in Iraq for 20 years with the same partners and is a testament to that. And I think, that commitment was made clear, and it was really important, particularly as the situation in Algeciras, in terms of the implementation of the peace agreement and the security situation in Colombia kind of continued to deteriorate as, there were certain failures of implementation in the peace agreement. And so for our partners to know that even though we didn't have a project, on the books, they could continue to reach out to us to talk about what was happening in Algeciras, as there was kind of an increase in homicides and an increase throughout the country in attacks against social leaders. And so I think, we were able to continue to build on the sincerity that our students brought to the relationship with them, and to really kind of continue to emphasize and build that trust. And I think that's invaluable, particularly in a place where trust has been eroded in so many different ways. Trust has been eroded between, residents of Algeciras and their government. Trust has been eroded between residents of Algeciras and other international actors. We were told stories such as, an international entity came in, kind of collected a bunch of information and left, and never shared the information with anyone that contributed to that. They never saw any publication. They never heard back from them. And that really, just as we think about as an academic community, as an NGO community, that really harms the possibility for a continued collaboration. And so for us, it was really important, particularly in the spirit of participatory action research, to not do that. And so we really tried to keep the points of contact alive. And one of the things that I love about the work that we do in Colombia and the work that we've been able to do with resupas is this kind of building of a web. And so when we were in Chaparral as part of the second iteration of the Joint Research Seminar in August 2019, we were able to have the resupas team come to Chaparral, which is a few hours drive away, and to exchange and to continue to keep that relationship alive. And so, just as I'm mindful that our time is kind of coming to a close. And so I just wanted to highlight, as Tom alluded to, some of the ways that we really measure the success of our work. And as you see on the screen, our work did result in the publication of a book, a bilingual book, but we don't really measure our success in the number of interviews that were done or the number of books that were printed. And even though I think we're really proud of the knowledge that was generated, and I think it's really important for many reasons that this was captured in this book, the perceptions of the reparations process and the understandings of peace in a community such as Algeciras. We really have thought about more of, we've measured the success of our relationship more so in terms of the endurance of our relationship, not the number of MOUs that we have, memorandums of understanding, but kind of the depth and the quality of those relationships, the ability to have difficult conversations, and just the strength of relationships. And we've used that word a lot, but I think it's a fundamental piece of peace building. And then the second, a second way that we kind of are understanding or measuring the success of the work is kind of the evolution of understanding that we have seen of the resupas team, their understanding of themselves as peace building actors in the community. And I think this underscores a little bit of a perhaps controversial point, but that, we really approach peace research as an intervention, a peace building intervention in and of itself. And so, by no means do we take any or all of the credit for the ways in which Resupas, and now Resupas as a formal, formally incorporated organization, Fundación, for all the peace building and change, social change work that they're doing. But, they have commented to us the ways in which, their work with us has contributed to their understandings of themselves as an actor. And, I have so many examples of this, but, one particular example that I love, just because PrEP is very much interested in supporting youth peace building. One of the chapters that our students worked on was about the youth perceptions of peace building, and the youngest person of the group was part of that, of Resupas's team was part of that research group. And through that process of doing that research, she began to understand that she herself was a youth leader in Algeciras, and she began to make connections with other youth peace builders, and then eventually went on to form her own organization that was using art and culture and concerned with environmental peace building in the community. And so, to see that that thread, and another beautiful thread that I love that is on my mind, because just last week, some of the Resupas teams formally incorporated an victims association, and that's what it is technically under the law, but they actually call it, a association of empowered women survivors. And the issue of survivors versus victims was a thing that came up over and over again in our conversations as researchers when we were in Algeciras, and so through that lens, we were really able to help them see themselves, or contribute to them seeing themselves as survivors, and in part, form this new kind of association that I think will be really different, drawing on the strengths of women who have experienced the worst of the violence in Algeciras. And, I cannot overemphasize the importance of this point of them seeing themselves as peace builders enough. And I say that because, as many of you may or may not know, there are many ways in which the peace agreement was not ultimately, or has not ultimately been implemented in the way that, we had hoped at the beginning of the process. And so, and it was such a beautiful document that there was, this great attachment to the document. But a lot of the work that we have been doing with Resupas is really kind of disentangling the idea of building peace from a peace agreement. And that is to say that, our part of our values and what emerged as the values of Resupas as well is that, peace is really built on a daily basis, every day, from the bottom up. And so in Algeciras, where unfortunately the state has not fully kind of filled the power vacuum that was created when the FARC demobilized, now is really is in the midst of a complex situation where there is the reemergence of armed actors, and Resupas sees themselves now as a key actor in kind of continuing to build peace in their community. Okay, so the last thing that I'll just say, because it kind of speaks to a lot of the themes that Tom presented at the beginning of this. And it again speaks to the work of Jean-Paul Lederach and this idea of building a web, which is really, kind of thought about as a relationship-centered approach that emphasizes who rather than how. And so this has always been kind of our commitment, that it's about who, and kind of following and listening to this kind of messy web that sometimes includes surprising actors. But, through our relationship with Resupas, we were able to create a relationship with the Truth Commission, which is the governmental body tasked with uncovering the truth of the violence of the conflict, and ensuring coexistence and no repetition. And in our, we're currently in our third iteration of the Joint Research Seminar, and we are now working with the Joint Research Seminar students, volume 3 with the Truth Commission, and that is thanks to kind of this organic relationship building approach that we've taken, and speaks to the ways and the multi-directional ways of mutual inquiry has kind of benefited and strengthened the work of all. And I guess with that, I know we're kind of running out of time. So I think, Amparo, if you want to.
Thank you very much, Katerina, and thank you to all of you for a wonderful presentation. I would like to ask all of you, but no everyone has to answer, but if you would have to do this work again, and I know that you're going to go back to Colombia and to continue doing this work, based on the experience and that you gained from this work, what kind of things would you do differently?
You want me to take that?
I can read one of the questions.
Sure.
Actually, is in some ways related to this question, that you can continue the conversation.
Sure.
So someone say, how would you recommend building trust between researchers and participants when communities mistrust institutions and might have bad experience in the past with other peace building processes that are ephemeral? So it's a question about trust and building trust.
Sure. That's a great question and a very legitimate question, I think. So often around the world, this lack of trust emerges from, frankly, often by the behavior of the visitor researchers, let's say, who don't fully open themselves, who are not fully transparent about their motives or their expectations, and who have an agenda. They are seeking to answer their own questions for whatever reason, whether they are students or faculty, researchers. They have questions they want answered. What we tried to do, and I'm not saying we have always done it successfully, is suspend our own questions and listen to what the questions are that our colleagues, in this case in Algeciras, really want to explore. What are the important questions in that community? Not what are the important questions about Colombia here in New York. And those questions can be very, very different. And so I think when I think about, both answering the question, like how to build trust, follow the questions of your fellow researchers, answer the questions that are important, or try to answer the questions that are important to the community. And in terms of things we would do different, we haven't done this perfectly. I mean, because of some of the things Marta described, we were sort of stuck in a bubble in New York trying to, formulate research questions and a research plan with some input from our Colombian partners, but frankly, not enough. And so I think we just always have that experience as a reminder to us to, have our interests, have our curiosity, but make sure that it's secondary to the interests and the significant issues to our partners in the field.
Okay,
I would add to that is just vulnerability as well. I think Tom mentioned that word, but for me, Spanish is not my first language, and I kind of, I make myself vulnerable in trying to, speak Spanish and kind of make fun of myself in a way too. That's my approach, and I think there's other ways to show vulnerability, and I think that goes a long way to build trust. And I don't think there's a magic. There's not a magic bullet in this, that's a bad analogy in peacebuilding, but it really does require just like consistently showing up. And that means perhaps doing a lot of groundwork before you come with a question. I did go to Algeciras before we went with a group of students. So, we constantly were kind of working at building that relationship.
Wonderful, thank you. I had two other questions more related to the findings and what you found about the peace process. One of them is, he says, or she says, while peace building efforts were successful in this particular case, and surely in many other spaces in Colombia, what are some of the structural and state-centered challenges to developing meaningful relationships in service of a lasting peace? And how might these challenges differ from other spaces in Colombia that experience the war differently? And some related question is, what are the most pressing challenges for peace building at the moment? What recommendations will you give to the next administration?
Oh, that's a big question.
Very question, very important.
Yeah.
I can
Go ahead,
answer the
Katerina.
second one first.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
What so much of our work is about is not only in Colombia, but it's also what our current project with Resupas is about. Really giving voice and money and value, I don't mean financially, to local peace building actors, and being really clear about who are those local peace building actors. And so, from a New York perspective, you might think that an organization that's based in Bogota, big NGO, might be a local actor in Colombia, but actually there are these small grassroots actors who are the ones who are navigating and really in difficult circumstances, kind of every day, keep maintaining resilience, building resilience, and kind of that wall against, complete violence. So I think that's a major recommendation that I would make to the next administration. Great.
And Marta, do you want to add and maybe expand a little bit on the in the insights from your work related to the peace building? You interview amazing actors and different actors, people that were in different spectrums of the conflict. If you can talk about 2 or 3 highlights of that work related to the peace and the conflict and where people are at the moment, or they were when you interviewed.
Yes, so my group of co-researchers, we only interviewed ex-combatants of the FARC. My other colleagues interview other groups of the community, and I think that, well, some of the results or some of the highlights of what we found were actually really interesting. The ex-combatants that we interviewed, that participated in these interviews, were actually very eager to build peace in the community. Many of them actually were, believed in the process, believed in what was happening, but of course they were also dissatisfied with President Duque's ambivalent attitude towards the agreement. Like this, apologies, I think there's noise in the background, but they were dissatisfied with this attitude of the government, and furthermore, they were actually a little bit scared for their security, and that was something that I think it is important to consider in a peace building process. Like if you have actors who are trying to reintegrate into society, to be part of this community, and they're trying to build peace, but they also are suffering from this fear of like, well, I don't know that I can trust that I'm safe here. This was actually something that was I think very, very important. Something also that was really important that we found is that for them, truth and forgiveness were key aspects of the reparations, something that they could give to the community. And some of them, they actually said that they've done some of these, and some of them said that they wanted to, and they were trying to find like the spaces to do it, or the opportunity to do it. And to me, the I don't know, the most optimistic or the most like the best highlight for me was to hear some of them explaining their collective projects that they had started in Algeciras. These are projects that were created with different ex-combatants, and they had the goal to create peace in the community, and it was a way for them to show, you know, how committed they actually are with the process. So to me, those were like some of the highlights, and overall, I think that the community was really looking forward for the peace process. I didn't talk to the other participants, I didn't talk to the other groups, but I know from conversations I had with my colleagues that, and from the book that was published, that there was a general sense of happiness that this peace agreement was in place, obviously with its challenges, but yeah, those I think were.
Was any difference that you found between generations, like between interviewing or doing focus groups with the youth and listening to the older population? Is anything different in the perception of the peace process and the agreement?
I mean, there was a sense in general that you know, young people didn't live the worst of the conflict in the same way that the older generation did. So there was a sense that you know, of just like a little bit more hopefulness. There was definitely a strong perception that they wanted to kind of rid Algeciras of the stigma that had been, you know, put on them as a community, so that they could have those opportunities to continue to contribute to peacefulness. And I will say this didn't emerge from this research specifically, but in conversations that we're having and part of, you know, the recent conversations we're having in our current research project, but they really see a political path as a way for them to contribute to peace building. And so whereas it's interesting, some of the municipal leaders that we've spoken to that are much older want nothing to do with politics at this point. A lot of youth are seeing themselves as having this political power. You know, I think one of the youngest people of any municipal council in all of Colombia is in Algeciras. And there are a lot of youth that work in the mayor's office. And so that's an interesting emerging trend, I think.
Wonderful. Thomas, a question for you. Do you have this expertise on education for peace and applying all these principles in different countries? In this research in Colombia, you apply participatory action research. Why, could you tell us why participatory action research or whether participatory action research could be a tool for peace building, and why?
You know, thank you, Amparo. You know, the short reason is participatory action research began in Colombia, so we figured we ought to really respect that and the roots of it. And you know, we've used that method in other places, and frankly, it was much more welcomed in Colombia than, for example, when we used it in Iraq. I think it's much more in line with the way people think, or at least our partners thought about how to respectfully engage with communities. You know, I'm a little bit, you know, dogmatic in terms of thinking that this is generally a better way for, you know, for social science researchers and others to engage with communities because of the fact that it is, you know, much less hierarchical, much less laden with the sort of power inequalities that often go along with research collaborations between international partners, between Northern and Southern partners. For all those reasons, I think it makes it more appropriate, especially in a, you know, in an environment that has been, where so many people have been so traumatized by violence, and frankly, by the, you know, this, the dilemma of, you know, the United States to Colombia. You know, I think we had an extra burden to demonstrate to our partners that we weren't there to colonize one more time, that we were there, you know, in true partnership. We were there to listen We were not there to establish a foothold. We were not there to open a new branch of the university. That we weren't there for any of those reasons. And I think participatory action research and the way that it's carried out was a very good way for us to demonstrate that and to live that day by day with our colleagues in Colombia. It's not only for Colombia. Like I said, we've used it in Iraq as well. It's a very, very good mechanism if what you're looking for is a more or less equal partnership between researchers north and south or east and west.
Wonderful. And the possibility of storytelling, right? And from what I read in your papers, the kind of healing process, if we can talk about healing, because some people think that the healing is not possible at all after so much pain, but the fact that the stories are shared are wonderful, and putting different people to talk at the same time is something that I learned from reading your work.
I mean, to that point of healing, it's not true that it's not possible. It's we've seen evidence of people. We've seen so many examples of partners with resupas and with other organizations who've acknowledged to us, the profound changes that they've experienced. Some of it because of their involvement in this research, the way they've begun to see the world differently, the way their families have been able to see the world differently, and to not to forget in any way what's happened, but to move past it in I think in a healthy way, to pay full respect to the pain and the suffering that's happened and to all the violence that's occurred, but to acknowledge that there is a possibility for a different future.
Beautiful. We have more questions of people who would like to know more about the substantive part of your research. I wonder if Katerina would like to talk about the wonderful papers and the book that is online where people can learn more about your work.
Yes, I put in the chat a link to our publications, and you'll see right away the publication of the book, the first volume of Finding Peace. Every year the Joint Research Seminar really takes a different shape because, the world is what it is and we have to respond to it. And so stay tuned for kind of the future publications. But, we would love if we love this opportunity to build a community at NYU and beyond to share our work in Colombia. And we, also have events on peace building and peace education in Colombia. And so definitely invite everyone to join us, to follow us on Twitter at NYU Peace, or to stay in touch, because I think we're really excited about getting to build relationships here in New York as well. I know many of you are in different places in the world, but to the same.
Thank you very much. So I invite the students and colleagues, academics who have joined this talk to continue the conversation with Tom and Marta and Katerina in other ways. I want to thank the speakers for this rich and enlightening conversation. And really, it's an amazing work, and we look forward to hearing more about the progress of this work in other parts of Colombia. On the other hand, I want to acknowledge and thank the Colombian Initiative academic directors, Sonia Ospina at Wagner and Frank Hensel at the Rosario University and Jill Late at CLACS, and all the faculty from Rosario and NYU and other universities who are supporting this initiative. I want to thank the colleagues from CLACS and Wagner and Universidad Rosario who have made possible this series, and to acknowledge the amazing work that you have done in ensuring the success of these conversations. So before we end, I want to remind you again about the next faculty working group in the spring. On March 16, we will have the Professor Kimberly Thayton talking about legacies of war, violence, and ecologies and kin. Professor Thayton is a professor in international humanitarian studies at the Fletcher School at Tufts University. And on the other hand, on April 20th, we will have Professor Frank Hensel from Rosario University talking about untold histories of the American divide. So those are some of the events that we are organizing as part of the Colombian Past, Present, and Future initiatives. We want to invite you, all of you, to keep tuned. And again, I want to say thank you to our wonderful speakers for tonight's conversation. Thank you. And with this, we're going to say goodbye. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Gracias.